Hello, everybody. We are going to read George MacDonald's book called At the Back of the North Wind. And look where we are. I just got here. It's not sunny today, but there's the ocean. We're overlooking it. All right, I like going to a serene type of place. So I had to hike here to get here, but I was reflecting for a moment on the way up here. It's like, why do we do this? You know, because your logical brain will be like, I could make $1,000 an hour right now, or whatever we make, $10 an hour, whatever. And it's just like, it doesn't always know why we're letting go and entering into a story. And yet, Jesus tells this story of the person who was a pearl hunter, right? And knew really good pearls. And when it was a man for this one, but, you know, could just as well be a woman. Maybe the woman had already bought her own field, right? But anyway, or there's a field, you know, and then a pearl. It's like you sell everything for that pearl of great price. Well, if you're so acclimated to this world, then you don't know how to actually determine the value of one of these things. You know, you don't recognize a pearl. I'm saying when we read George MacDonald, because he was C.S. Lewis's spiritual mentor, he said C.S. Lewis, who was this profound writer and had a photographic memory, was a Cambridge professor and taught in Oxford as well. I met his stepson and he was saying that he had a photographic memory and they could just pull like Dante or something off of his shelf and start reading it, and he would just continue on while they held it. Oh, look. George MacDonald tells the sermon of the white stone. At Revelation, you'll get a white stone. I did a video on that the other day. Your God name will be on it. All right, so George MacDonald, I mean, I just love him. He has this profound understanding of who you are as a soul in God. And anyway, let's just get into the story, because every time I read his stories, they're just so cleansing. They're just, you want to make everything right with God and let God make everything right in you. But anyway, that's my preamble for today. All right, only 2.5 minutes or so. Let's get you a good view. All right. Let's begin. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. I appreciate your presence. It's lovely to know that other people in the world are getting this good medicine. That's like one of the gifts that I feel like God has given me, is to recognize good medicine for our soul. And that's just what I keep putting on my channel. People don't understand. Why is this post here? Why, whatever, you know, they don't understand. A lot of people don't understand, but I'm just like, whatever, I'm just going to keep putting out good medicine. If people want to take it, they will. All right. Let me put this down a little more. All right. If you hear tourists behind, they often come up here, but I'm down below the sight line so that they can take their horizon pictures. Okay, there it is. That's the ocean. So if we could watch the waves. Chapter 27. Now, it doesn't matter that we're starting here. You can just start here if you're starting here, and then go back to the beginning and just be present with each one, or listen in your car or whatever, wherever you can listen. Who knows what part God will speak to heal your soul? But God's always in the business of, it's more than a business. He's not doing it for business sake. It's business time. Of healing your soul. Jesus said that I come to heal the brokenhearted. Whatever religion, whatever faith path you're on, Jesus still came to do that. And so it's going to be done wherever you are, however he can. He's going to keep trying to heal your broken heart till you're whole again. That's the word shalom, is whole, wholeness, real peace, inner peace, reconciled. Anyway, all right, that's enough. The children's hospital. The first day his father resumed his work, Diamond's father was ill for a while, and he's a cabman on a horse. This is in the 1800s in England. Forgot to drink my water. Diamond went with him as usual. Diamond was driving the cab himself, and he's this little boy. Diamond has been to the back of the north wind. That means for him, he died and came back. He was really ill. Did you see that bee? Is that bee in the picture? There's just a little bee getting... Oh, I love it. I saw bunnies on the way up here. Anyway, Diamond went with him as usual. In the afternoon, however, his father, having taken a fare to the neighborhood, went home to his own neighborhood where they lived, right? And Diamond drove the cab the rest of the day. It was hard for old Diamond. That's their horse. Anyway, it's so weird. I kept using the diamond emoji this morning. And I forgot I was going to read this today. Because you are a diamond, But anyway. One second. There's, all right. Hopefully you can hear anyway. So it was hard for old Diamond to do all the work, but they could not afford to have another horse, to switch off. They continued to save him as much as possible and feed him well, and he did bravely. The next morning, his father was so much stronger that Diamond thought he might go and ask Mr. Raymond to take him to see Nanny, the friend who was a street sweeper, this girl who was also in a pretty bad plight. Well, you'll see. Just watch how it unfolds today. I trust it. I trust the story is here exactly for you in this moment. God is above time. So God is divine love. God knows how to bring all this to us, exactly the right moment for our soul's health. So I wish you love. All right, so take him to see Nanny. He found him at home, Mr. Raymond. His servant had grown friendly by this time and showed him in without any cross-questioning. Mr. Raymond received him with his usual kindness, consented at once, and walked with him to the hospital, which was close at hand. It was a comfortable, old-fashioned house, built in the reign of Queen Anne, and in her day, no doubt, inhabited by rich and fashionable people. Now it was a home for poor sick children, who were carefully tended for love's sake. There are regions in London where a hospital in every other street might be full of such children whose fathers and mothers are dead or unable to take care of them. Wow. Because remember, in those days, they would send parents off to the workhouse as debtors prisons. Charles Dickens would write about that. Like Oliver Twist time. Anyway. There's still orphans now. God, we pray for all the orphans and widows. And any way that we feel like an orphan inside or a widow who lost our husband and don't have a father. I always pray that. Reconcile us to the Father in heaven, the Father and Mother in heaven. Psalm 27:10. I won't make this a teaching video. I have plenty of those. But it does say, when my father and mother forsake me, the Lord, the I am that I am, picks me up. I love that verse because God is beyond mother and father, but is both of those for us. We're to care for the widows and orphans and the widows and orphans within ourselves who forgot we have a good father and mother. We have a good husband. We're the mystical bride. Christ is the groom. But welcome whatever faith practice you are, too. I wish you love and just full love. Anyway, When Diamond followed Mr. Raymond into the room where those children who had got over the worst of their illness and were growing better lay, he saw a number of little iron bedsteads with their heads to the walls, and in every one of them a child whose face was a story in itself. In some, health had begun to appear in a tinge upon the cheeks and a doubtful brightness in the eyes, just as out of the cold, dreary winter the spring comes in, blushing buds and bright crocuses. In others there were more of the signs of winter left. Their faces reminded you of snow and keen cutting winds, more than of sunshine and soft breezes and butterflies. But even in them the signs of suffering told that the suffering was less, and that if the springtime had but arrived, it had yet arrived. Diamond looked all around, but he could see no Nanny. He turned to Mr. Raymond with a question in his eyes. "Well," said Mr. Raymond. "Nanny's not here," said Diamond. "Oh, yes, she is. I don't see her." "I do, though. There she is," because Mr. Raymond had made sure she got brought in, you know. He pointed to a bed right in front of where Diamond was standing. "That's not Nanny," he said. "It is Nanny. I have seen her many times since you have. Illness makes a great difference." "Why, that girl must have been to the back of the north wind," thought Diamond. But he said nothing, only stared, and as he stared, something of the old Nanny began to dawn through the face of the new Nanny. The old Nanny, though a good girl and a friendly girl, had been rough, blunt in her speech, and dirty in her person. She was raised by this woman who just drank gin all day, you know, and used her just to take her money as she swept the street corner in London. So, you know, she had it rough. Anyway, just a little backstory of Nanny. And dirty in her person. Her face would always have reminded one who had already been to the back of the north wind of something he had seen in the best of company, but it had been coarse notwithstanding, partly from the weather, partly from her living amongst low people, and partly from having to defend herself. Now it was so sweet and gentle and refined that she might have had a lady and a gentleman for a father and mother. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry. I don't think I bought Kleenexes. Wow. And Diamond could not help thinking of words which he had heard in the church the day before. Quote, "Surely it is good to be afflicted," end quote, or something like that. North Wind, somehow or other, must have had to do with her. She had grown from a rough girl into a gentle maiden. Wow. Mr. Raymond, however, was not surprised, for he was used to see such lovely changes, something like the change which passes upon the crawling, many-footed creature when it turns sick and ill and revives, a butterfly with 2 wings instead of many feet. Instead of her having to take care of herself, kind hands ministered to her, making her comfortable and sweet and clean, soothing her aching head and giving her cooling drink when she was thirsty, and kind eyes, the stars of the kingdom of heaven, had shone upon her, so that what with the fire of the fever and the dew of tenderness, that which was coarse in her had melted away, and her whole face had grown so refined and sweet that Diamond did not know her. But as he gazed, the best of the old face, all the true and good part of it, that which was Nanny herself, dawned upon him, like the moon coming out of a cloud, until at length, instead of only believing Mr. Raymond that this was she, he saw for himself that it was Nanny indeed, very worn, but grown beautiful. Well, look at the picture. He went up to her. She smiled. He had heard her laugh, but had never seen her smile before. "Nanny, do you know me?" said Diamond. She only smiled again, as if the question was amusing. She was not likely to forget him, for although She did not yet know it was he who had got her there. She had dreamed of him often, and had talked much about him when delirious, with her fever, Nor was it much wonder, for he was the only boy except Joe who had ever shown her kindness. Meantime, Mr. Raymond was going from bed to bed, talking to the little people. Everyone knew him, and everyone was eager to have a look and a smile and a kind word from him. Diamond sat down on a stool at the head of Nanny's bed. She laid her hand in his. No one else of her old acquaintance had been near her. Suddenly, a little voice called out, "Won't Mr. Raymond tell us a story?" "Oh, yes, please do, cried several little voices, which also were stronger than the rest. For Mr. Raymond was in the habit of telling them a story when he went to see them, and they enjoyed it far more than the other nice things which the doctor permitted him to give them. "Very well," said Mr. Raymond, "I will. What sort of story shall it be?" "A true story," said one little girl. "A fairy tale," said a little boy. "Well," said Mr. Raymond, "I suppose, as there is a difference, I may choose." "I can't think of any true story just at this moment, so I will tell you a sort of fairy one." "Oh, jolly!" exclaimed the little boy who had called out for a fairy tale. "It came to my head this morning as I got out of bed," continued Mr. Raymond, "and if it turns out pretty well, I will write it down and get somebody to print it for me, and then you shall read it when you like." "Then nobody ever heard it before?" asked one other child. "No, nobody." "Oh," exclaimed several, thinking it very grand to have the first telling, and I dare say there might be a peculiar freshness about it, because everything would be nearly as new to the storyteller himself as to the listeners. Some were only sitting up, and some were lying down. So there could not be the same busy gathering and bustling and shifting to and fro with which children generally prepare themselves to hear a story, but their faces and the turning of their heads and many feeble exclamations of expected pleasure showed that all such preparations were making within them, right? Rise up. My shirt that I'm wearing today says rise up. And God kept showing me that so many times with roses. Rise, open your soul eyes, right? And then you'll see correctly. You'll see the right way. Seek first the kingdom of God. That's what that is. And then all these other, and his righteousness, his right wayness, the right way of love. And then all these other things will just be added to you. Anyway. That's what I found. But, you've got your own journey to unfold. I wish you the best, of course. Always the best. But I encourage you to be kind to people along the way, because it's sometimes a painful journey. You don't know what other people are going through, so do your best to be kind to everyone. I'm like, one way you can outwardly do that is like my videos and share them. But there's no pressure. But it is a way to be kind so that other people get this story, because it's so healing for our souls. This isn't me. This is God being so healing in my life that I just want to give it to everybody. I want everybody in the world to have. It's free copy right now, so I can read this for us, right? And I'm not charging for these videos. Anyway. And comment as well. Just write down your favorite part of this story. Comment on all of my videos. Anything, any kind quote that you like or anything. Just start putting quotes or do something. Because then it gets the videos out more. It's like this. I'm not going to do it any other way. It has to be some organic way. God will do it, or we do it organically. Anyway, that's just a side note. But no pressure. Okay, so even if this is already out to 1 million people, it's like there are more than 1 million people in the world that can heal from this. The closed captions can go into all sorts of different languages. I was reading that only 20% of the world speaks English, right? There's the whole rest of the 80% of people in this world that could benefit from this. All right. So just show up in your own life. Show up. Remember to keep showing up. You never know how people are going to be healed by you. Rise, open your soul eyes, and show up. Anyway, here's the story. Some were only sitting up, and so they were preparations were being made within them. Mr. Raymond stood in the middle of the room that he might turn from side to side and give each a share of seeing him. Diamond kept his place by Nanny's side with her hand in his. I do not know how much of Mr. Raymond's story the smaller children understood. Indeed, I don't quite know how much there was in it to be understood, for in such a story, everyone has just to take what he can get, right? Just like what I was saying at the beginning. I didn't know I haven't read this. I remember how old my kid was when I read this. So it was more than 13 years ago when I last read this, I think. Unless I read it in between that. But I remember that time. They all listened, and certainly with great attention. Mr. Raymond wrote it down afterwards, and here it is, somewhat altered, no doubt, for a good storyteller tries to make his stories better every time he tells them, or she tells them, right? I cannot myself help thinking that he was somewhat indebted for this one to the old story of the Sleeping Beauty. It's a very ancient story. And maybe in the Red Fairy book, and those are free online as well. It's called Little Daylight, chapter 28. No house of any pretension to be called a palace is in the least worthy of the name, except it has a wood near it, very near it, and the nearer the better. Not all round it, I don't mean that, for a palace ought to be open to the sun and wind, and stand high and brave, with weathercocks glittering and flags flying. But on one side of every palace there must be a wood, and there was a very grand wood indeed, beside the palace of the king, who was going to be Daylight's father. Such a grand wood that nobody yet had ever got to the other end of it. Near the house it was kept very trim and nice, and it was free of brushwood for a long way in. But by degrees it got wild, and it grew wilder and wilder and wilder, until some said wild beasts at last did what they liked in it. The king and his courtiers often hunted, however, and this kept the wild beast far away from the palace. One glorious summer morning, when the wind and the sun were out together, when the vanes were flashing and the flags frolicking against the blue sky, Little Daylight made her appearance from somewhere, nobody could tell where, a beautiful baby, with such bright eyes that she might have come from the sun, only by and by she might equally well have come out of the wind. There was a great jubilation in the palace. Here's a picture. For this was the first baby the queen had had, and there is as much happiness over a new baby in a palace as in a cottage. But there is one disadvantage of living near a wood. You do not know quite who your neighbors may be. Everybody knew there were in it several fairies. I forgot this part. Look at that. I got my fingers done like a fairy story. Always to remind it. I have always for the longest time to remind ourselves of our soul nature, to remind me always to keep remembering my soul nature. It's glittery like this. It is. What? I asked one of my friends for her input on my videos. She hasn't seen much of them. She's like, she's like, glitter. Everybody likes glitter. I'm like, all right, well, there, we just had our glitter, guys. I don't know what she meant. She said people like watching shiny things, but my channel's not about the outward shiny things. You're inwardly shiny, your shiny self. Anyway, several fairies living within a few miles of the palace, who always had something to do with each new baby that came. For fairies live so much longer than we that they can have business with a good many generations of human mortals. The curious houses they lived in were well known also. I can't read who the author is of this picture, but to give him or her credit. The artist, even though it's free domain. How pretty. Anyway, okay. So the curious houses they lived in were well known also. One a hollow oak, another a birch tree, though nobody could ever find how that fairy made a house of it. Another a hut of growing trees intertwined and patched up with turf and moss. But there was another fairy who had lately come to the place, and nobody even knew she was a fairy except the other fairies. A wicked old thing she was, always concealing her power and being as disagreeable as she could in order to tempt people to give her offense, to catch them on offense and give her offense, that she might have the pleasure of taking vengeance upon them. The people about thought she was a witch, and those who knew her by sight were careful to avoid offending her. She lived in a mud house in a swampy part of the forest. In all history, we find that fairies give their remarkable gifts to prince or princess, or any child of sufficient importance in their eyes, always at the christening. The baptism, right? That's a christening. Now, right? The christening and the naming, I don't know. I think it's the baptism. Now, this can be understood. This we can understand because it is an ancient custom amongst human beings as well. And it is not hard to explain why wicked fairies should choose the same time to do unkind things. All right, we're all the good angels of God, and the Holy Spirit gives us the good, But it is difficult to understand how they should be able to do them, for you would fancy all wicked creatures would be powerless on such an occasion. But I never knew of any interference on the part of a wicked fairy that did not turn out a good thing in the end. What a good thing, for instance, it was that one princess should sleep for 100 years. Was she not saved from all the plague of young men who were not worthy of her? Right? Because when she slept, finally a prince had heard about her, and he had to go through the brambles to get to her. He had to. And so he was a worthy knight, a worthy man of that princess. Had he not had to work so hard, then, Anyway, she was rewarded in the end. This is like the prodigal returns, right? If you know. Prodigal, we can all be prodigals when we turn away from God. It's not just a prodigal spouse. Anyway, what a good thing, right? For instance, it was that one princess should sleep for 100 years. Was she not saved from all the plague of young men who were not worthy of her? And did she not come awake exactly at the right moment when the right prince kissed her? For my part, I cannot help wishing a good many girls would sleep till just the same fate overtook them. It would be happier for them and more agreeable to their friends. Oh my gosh. Of course, all the known fairies were invited to the christening, but the king and queen were never thought of inviting an old witch, for the power of the fairies that they have by nature, they have by nature. Whereas a witch gets her power by wickedness. Here's a witch with the black cat. So the Holy Spirit, is in the angels. I'm going to get my hat because it's just starting to drizzle. And I grabbed a hat on my way out. It was in my car. And so, we were reading about Anna, the prophetess. It's 2 times the word prophetess comes in the New Testament. Anna came and she prophesied over Jesus, and they gave room for her in the synagogue, in the church of that time, the synagogue, for her to speak those prophecies. And I looked up the Greek word prophetess in that yesterday, I think it was. And it says a feminine of prophet. And under the word prophet is the word poet, because they would think that poets would speak the words of God, songstress, right, in song. So it's so amazing. I can't wait. I got to include that in a teaching video. But anyway, they get, Anna was not wicked. She got these powers. Saint Anna, she got these powers from the Holy Spirit. It says the Holy Spirit gave her what to say about Jesus, right? And Simeon was there as well. So there was a male witness and a female witness of Jesus at his circumcision. So that's a kind of presenting him to the temple. That's what they would do back then. All right. But wickedness comes from twisting the good and from evil powers, and not from the good. It pretends. The only other time the word prophetess was used in the feminine was in Revelations about the church that accepted Jezebel, who pretended to be a prophetess, but got her powers from evil, and she was within the church. It was in the letters to the churches. So this is an important lesson for all of us. As has she been kicked out yet, as of yet? There's so many Greek words in the book of Revelation. Pharmacia is in there. They will be deceived by pharmacia. Just go look that up yourself. It's not hard to look up. I only took 2 years of Greek, but you don't need to know Greek to look these things up. Anyway, so she got it from wickedness. Whereas a witch gets her power by wickedness. The other fairies, however, knowing the danger thus run, provided as well as they could against accidents from her quarter. But they could neither render her powerless, nor could they arrange their gifts in reference to hers beforehand, for they could not tell what those might be. Of course, the old hag was there without being asked. Not to be asked was just what she wanted, that she might have a sort of reason for doing what she wished to do. For somehow, even the wickedest of creatures likes a pretext for doing the wrong thing. We always think we were wronged, and so that's why we had to do that thing. But just don't do wrong no matter what. That's why Jesus says, pray for your enemies. Bless those who persecute you, so that you won't be tempted to do what is evil. Maybe that person will amend someday, and you did evil to them. They're God's child just as well. Have boundaries. Don't let other people's demons, let's say, torture you. We're meant to stand up. Hate the sin, not the sinner. Step on the serpents and scorpions, but not the person. It's delicate business, this. But you must be very strong, very strong. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Of course, the old hag... Okay, so 5 fairies had, one after the other, given the child such gifts as each counted best, and the 5th had just stepped back to her place in the surrounding splendor of ladies and gentlemen, when, mumbling a laugh between her toothless gums, the wicked fairy hobbled out into the middle of the circle. And at the moment when the archbishop was handing the baby to the lady at the head of the nursery department of state affairs, addressed him thus, giving a bite or two to every word before she could part with it. Please, your grace, I'm very deaf. Would your grace mind repeating the princess's name? With pleasure, my good woman, said the archbishop, stooping to shout in her ear. The infant's name is Little Daylight. And little daylight it shall be, cried the fairy, in the tone of a dry axle, and little good shall any of her gifts do, for I bestow upon her the gift of sleeping all day long, whether she will or not. Ha ha, he, hi hi. Then out started the 6th fairy, who of course the others had arranged should come after the wicked one in order to undo as much as she might. If she sleep all day, she said mournfully, she shall at least wake all night. A nice prospect for her mother and me, thought the poor king, for they loved her far too much to give her up to nurses, especially at night, as most kings and queens do, and are sorry for it afterwards. Wow, they just give their children away for other people to raise them. Yeah, you spoke before I had done, said the wicked fairy. That's against the law. It gives me another chance. I beg your pardon, said the other fairies all together. She did. I hadn't done laughing, said the crone. And now I have heard from someone that he had never seen an ugly witch before. So they don't always look ugly on the outside, and yet inside they're rotting. They are, because there's wickedness. Sometimes it shows, sometimes they come as the angel of light. Like Jesus, wasn't it Jesus who said Satan appears as that? But anyway, so you've got to know that for your own life and your own spiritual warfare. Because it's here. Ephesians 6:12. We battle not against flesh and bones, but against powers and principalities and rulers in high places, wicked powers in high places, something like that. Evil rulers in high places and wickedness. Anyway, I was memorizing it again yesterday. So, she did. I hadn't done laughing, said the crone. I had only got to high, and I had to go through ho, and hoo. So I decree that if she wakes all night, she shall wax and wane with its mistress, the moon. And what that may mean, I hope her royal parents will live to see. Ho, hoo. But out stepped another fairy, for they had been wise enough to keep two in reserve, because every fairy knew the trick of one. Until, said the seventh fairy, a prince comes who shall kiss her without knowing it. The wicked fairy made a horrid noise like an angry cat and hobbled away. She could not pretend that she had not finished her speech this time, for she had laughed ho and hoo. I don't know what that means, said the poor king to the seventh fairy. Don't be afraid, the meaning will come with the thing itself, said she. The assembly broke up, and miserable enough, the queen at last prepared for a good many sleepless nights, and the lady at the head of the nursery department, anything but comfortable in the prospect before her, for of course the queen could not do it all. As for the king, he made up his mind with what courage he could summon to meet the demands of the case, but wondered whether he could with any propriety require the first lord of the treasury to take a share in the burden laid upon him. I will not attempt to describe what they had to go through for some time, but at last the household settled into a regular system, a very irregular one in some respects, for at certain seasons the palace rang all night with bursts of laughter from little Daylight, whose heart the old fairy's curse could not reach. She was Daylight still, only a little in the wrong place, for she always dropped asleep at the first hint of dawn in the east. But her merriment was of short duration. When the moon was at the full, she was in glorious spirits, and as beautiful as it was possible for a child of her age to be. But as the moon waned, she faded until at last she was wan and withered like the poorest, sickliest child you might come upon in the streets of a great city in the arms of a homeless mother. Then the night was quiet as the day, for the little creature lay in her gorgeous cradle night and day with hardly a motion, and indeed at last without even a moan, like one dead. At first they often thought she was dead, but at last they got used to it, and only consulted the almanac to find the moment she would begin to revive, which of course was with the first appearance of the silver thread of the crescent moon. Then she would move her lips, and they would give her a little nourishment, and she would grow better and better and better until for a few days she was splendidly well. She was always merriest out in the moonlight, but even when near her worst, she seemed better when in warm summer nights they carried her cradle out into the light of the waning moon. Then in her sleep she would smile the faintest, most pitiful smile. For a long time few people ever saw her awake. As she grew older, she became such a favorite, however, that about the palace there were always some who would contrive to keep awake at night in order to be near her. But she soon began to take every chance of getting away from her nurses and enjoying her moonlight alone. And thus things went on until she was nearly 17 years of age. Her father and mother had by that time got so used to the odd state of things that they had ceased to wonder at them. All their arrangement had reference to the state of the Princess Daylight, and it is amazing how things contrived to accommodate themselves. But how any prince was ever to find and deliver her appeared inconceivable. As she grew older, she had grown more and more beautiful, with the sunniest hair and the loveliest eyes of heavenly blue, brilliant and profound as the sky of a June day. Wow, it's June right this moment. It just turned so. But they call it June gloom here sometimes because the sun has to burn away this morning cloud. Sometimes I come here at sunset. We watched the sunset over the ocean. I'm facing the west. Anyway. But so much more painful and sad was the change as her bad time came on. The more beautiful she was in the full moon, the more withered and worn did she become as the moon waned. At the time at which my story has now arrived, she looked, when the moon was small or gone, like an old woman exhausted with suffering. This was the more painful, that her appearance was unnatural, for her hair and her eyes did not change. Her wan face was both drawn and wrinkled, and had an eager, hungry look. Her skinny hands moved as if wishing, but unable to lay hold of something. Her shoulders were bent forward, her chest went in, and she stooped as if she were 80 years old. At last she had to be put to bed, and there await the flow of the tide of life. But she grew to dislike being seen, still more being touched by any hands during the season. One lovely summer evening, when the moon lay all but gone upon the verge of the horizon, she vanished from our attendants, and it was only after searching for her a long time in great terror that they found her fast asleep in the forest, at the foot of a silver birch, and carried her home. Carried her home. Wow, I just did a video by a band called Fun, period. We are young. I think I did that alive, but it was like "Carry Me Home Tonight" is one of their lyrics. Just that she's carried home at this night, you guys. I didn't know that I'd be reading this story, or this was in it. A little way from the palace, there was a great open glade covered with the greenest and softest grass. This was her favorite haunt, for here the full moon shone free and glorious, while through a vista in the trees she could generally see more or less of the dying moon as it crossed the opening. Here she had a little rustic house built for her, and here she mostly resided. None of the court might go there without leave, and her own attendants had learned by this time not to be officious in waiting upon her, so that she was very much at liberty. Whether the good fairies had anything to do with it or not, I cannot tell. But at last, because we all have guardian angels, Jesus said that their angels speak to the Father in heaven. He sees them. Of a little child, don't offend a little one. It's worse for you to be anyway, there's cast into the water with a millstone. Understand that spiritually. There's a big spiritual riddle and understanding in that. A little one, my brother told me, in the Greek means an initiate, someone who just becomes a Christian or just wakes up to these high truths and high love. And so you're not to offend a little one who just come to this new place. Ever. Like, you're held in great responsibility if you do, by crushing them. You know, Jesus said, a bent reed I will not break, a burning flax I will not put out. Just if there's a little fire in us, right? Anyway, whether the good fairies had anything to do with it or not, I cannot tell. But at last she got into the way of retreating further into the wood every night as the moon waned, so that sometimes they had great trouble finding her. But as she was always very angry if she discovered that they were watching her, they scarcely dared to do so. At length, one night, they thought they had lost her altogether. It was morning before they found her. Feeble as she was, she had wandered into a thicket a long way from the glade, and there she lay fast asleep, of course. Although the fame of her beauty and sweetness had gone abroad, yet, as everybody knew, she was under a bad spell. No king in the neighborhood had any desire to have her for a daughter-in-law. There were serious objections to such a relation. People misjudge you, right? They don't recognize you as a princess because they just see the curse. Anyway, about this time in a neighboring kingdom, in consequence of the wickedness of the nobles, an insurrection took place upon the death of the old king. The greater part of the nobility was massacred, and the young prince was compelled to flee for his life. Disguised like a peasant, for some time, until he got out of the country, he suffered much from hunger and fatigue. But when he got into that ruled by the princess's father, who had no longer any fear of being recognized, he fared better. for the people were kind. He did not abandon his disguise, however. One tolerable reason was that he had no other clothes to put on, and another that he had very little money and did not know where to get any more. There was no good in telling everybody he met that he was a prince, for he felt that a prince ought to be able to get on like other people, else his rank only made a fool of him. Right? He had read of princes setting out upon adventure, and here he was out in similar case, only without having had a choice in the matter. He would go on and see what would come of it. For a day or two he had been walking through the palace wood, and he had next to nothing to eat, when he came upon the strangest little house, inhabited by a very nice, tidy, motherly old woman. This was one of the good fairies. The moment she saw him, she knew quite well who he was and what was going to come of it, but she was not at liberty to interfere with the orderly march of events. She received him with a kindness she would have shown to any other traveler, and gave him bread and milk, which he thought the most delicious food he had ever tasted, wondering that they did not have it for dinner at the palace sometimes. The old woman pressed him to stay all night. When he awoke, he was amazed to find how well and strong he felt. She would not take any of the money he offered, but begged him, if he found occasion of continuing in the neighborhood, to return and occupy the same quarters. "Thank you much, good mother," answered the prince, "but there's little chance of that. The sooner I get out of this wood, the better." "I don't know that," said the fairy. "What do you mean?" asked the prince. "Why, how should I know?" returned she. "How should I know?" "I can't tell," said the prince. "Very well," said the fairy. "How strangely you talk," said the prince. "Do I?" said the fairy. "Yes, you do," said the prince. "Very well," said the fairy. The prince was not used to being spoken to in this fashion, so he felt a little angry and turned and walked away. But this did not offend the fairy. She stood at the door of her little house, looking after him till the trees hid him quite. Then she said, "At last," and went in, right? The prince wondered and got nowhere. The sun sank and went out of sight, and he seemed no nearer to the end of the wood than ever. He sat down on a fallen tree, ate a bite of bread. Ah, that's in a Keene song. Fallen tree, I felt the branches of it looking at me. Is this the place we used to go? Used to know. Is this the place that I've been dreaming of? Somewhere only we know. I'll give the name of that song. I don't want to sing too much of it. I'm quoting a band called Keene. Wow. He sat down on a fallen tree, ate a bit of bread the old woman had given him, and waited for the moon, for although he was not much of an astronomer, he knew the moon would rise up sometime, because she had risen the night before. Up she came, slow and slow, but of a good size, pretty nearly round indeed. Whereupon, greatly refreshed with his piece of bread, he got up and went, he knew not whither. After walking a considerable distance, he thought he was coming to the outside of the forest. But when he reached what he thought the last of it, he found himself only upon the edge of a great open space in it, covered with grass. I heard that song, actually, in Ephesus, in Turkey, of over 5 years ago. Almost 5 years ago. Not quite. Anyway. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, lived in Ephesus, right nearby where I heard it. After the resurrection, she lived there for like 30 years, John and Mary. And you can see there were like pilgrims' relics that were there for many, many years. John and Mary Magdalene, I think. He had not seen, anyway, the moon shone very bright, and he thought he had never seen a more lovely spot. Okay, after walking a considerable distance, he thought he was coming to the outside of the forest, but when he reached what he thought the last of it, he found himself only upon the edge of a great open space in it, covered with grass. The moon shone very bright, and he thought he had never seen a more lovely spot. Still, it looked dreary because of its loneliness, for he could not see the house at the other side. He sat down weary again and gazed into the glade. He had not seen so much room for several days. All at once he spied something in the middle of the grass. What could it be? It moved, it came nearer. Was it a human creature gliding across? A girl dressed in white, gleaming in the moonshine. She came nearer and nearer. He crept behind a tree and watched, wondering. It must be some strange being of the wood, a nymph, whom the moonlight and the warm dusky air had enticed from her tree. But when she came close to where he stood, he no longer doubted she was human, for he had caught sight of her sunny hair and her clear blue eyes, and the loveliest face and form that he had ever seen. All at once she began singing like a nightingale and dancing, right, like nightingale, because she's in the night, right? Dancing to her own music with her eyes ever turned towards the moon. She passed close to where he stood, dancing by the edge of the trees, and away in a great circle towards the other side, until he could see but a spot of white in the yellowish green of the moonlit grass. But when he fared once more, it would vanish quite. The spot grew and became a figure once more. She approached him again, singing and dancing, and waving her arms over her head until she had completed the circle. Just opposite his tree, she stood, ceased her song, dropped her arms, and broke into a long, clear laugh, musical as a brook. Then, as if tired, she threw herself on the grass, lay gazing at the moon. The prince was almost afraid to breathe, lest he should startle her, and she should vanish from his sight. As to venturing near her, that never came into his head. She had lain for a long hour or longer, when the prince began to again doubt concerning her. Perhaps she was but a vision of his own fancy, or was she a spirit of the wood after all? If so, he too would haunt the wood, glad to have lost kingdom and everything for the hope of being near her. It's true love, right? He would build him a hut in the forest, and there he would live for the pure chance of seeing her again. Upon nights like this, at least, she would come out and bask in the moonlight and make his soul blessed. Oh, that's what women can do. A true woman, a true lady, a true queen. We're called to be priests and kings and priests. I just put that in my video yesterday in the comments. I pinned it to the top. I don't know when you'll get this, but anyway, but while he thus dreamed, she sprang to her feet, turned her face full to the moon, and began singing as if she would draw her down from the sky by the power of her entrancing voice. She looked more beautiful than ever. Again she began dancing to her own music, and danced away into the distance. Once more she returned in a similar manner, but although he was watching as eagerly as before, what with fatigue and what with gazing, he fell fast asleep before she came near him. When he awoke, it was broad daylight, and the princess was nowhere. He could not leave the place. What if she should come again the next night? He would gladly endure a day's hunger to see her yet again. He would buckle his belt quite tight. He walked around the glade to see if he could discover any prints of her feet, but the grass was so short, and her steps had been so light, that she had not left a single trace behind her. He walked halfway around the wood without seeing anything to account for her presence. Then he spied a lovely little house, and with thatched roof and low eaves, surrounded by an exquisite garden, with doves and peacocks walking in it. Of course, this must be where the gracious lady who loved the moonlight lived. Forgetting his appearance, he walked towards the door, determined to make inquiries. But as he passed a little pond full of gold and silver fishes, he caught sight of himself and turned to find the door to the kitchen. There he knocked and asked for a piece of bread. The good-natured cook brought him in and gave him an excellent breakfast, which the prince found nothing the worse for being served in the kitchen. While he ate, he talked with his entertainer and learned that this was the favorite retreat of the Princess Daylight. But he learned nothing more, both because he was afraid of seeming inquisitive and because the cook did not choose to be heard talking about her mistress to a peasant lad who had begged for his breakfast. Look, as he rose, there's the rose. Rise, open your soul eyes. You'll never know what's going to happen. To take his leave, it occurred to him that he might not be so far from the old woman's cottage as he had thought, and he asked the cook whether she knew anything of such a place, describing it well as he could. She said she knew it well enough, adding with a smile, "Oh, it's there you're going, is it?" "Yes, it's not far off. It's not more than 3 miles, but mind what you're about, you know." "Why do you say that?" "If you're after any mischief, she'll make you repent it." That's good, because she's a good fairy. "The best thing that could happen under the circumstances," remarked the prince. That's the best thing that could happen under the circumstances, if someone's up to, no good, mischief. "What do you mean by that?" asked the cook. "Why, it stands to reason," answered the prince, "that if you wish to do anything wrong, the best thing for you is to be made to repent of it." Wow. "I see," said the cook. "Well, I think you may venture. She is a good old soul." "Which way does it lie from here?" asked the prince. She gave him full instructions, and he left her with many thanks. Being now refreshed, however, the prince did not go back to the cottage that day. He remained in the forest, amusing himself as best as he could, but waiting anxiously for the night, in hope that the princess would again appear. Nor was he disappointed, for directly the moon rose, he spied a glimmering shape far across the glade. As it drew nearer, he saw it was she indeed, not dressed in white as before, in a pale blue like the sky. She looked lovelier still. He thought it was the blue suited her yet better than the white. He did not know that she was really more beautiful because the moon was nearer the full. In fact, the next night was full moon, and the princess would then be at the zenith of her loveliness. The prince feared for some time that she was not coming near his hiding place that night. But the circles in her dance ever widened as the moon rose, until at last they embraced the whole glade, and she came so closer to the trees where he was hiding than she had come the night before. He was entranced with her loveliness, for it was indeed a marvelous thing. All night long he watched her, but dared not go near her. He would have been ashamed of watching her too, had he not become almost incapable of thinking of anything but how beautiful she was. Rise up, I say to the prince. Rise up, right? The prince in each of us, and the princess. Look, the music notes playing, and I have Jesus and Mary back here on the back of this. The baby and child. Anyway, I don't know why I'm showing, but let's see. I only have a few minutes. I want to get to the end of this, right? But I don't want to rush. How beautiful she was. He watched the whole night long and saw that as the moon went down, she retreated in smaller and smaller circles until at last he could see her no more. Weary as he was, he set out for the old woman's cottage, where he arrived just in time for her breakfast, which she shared with him. He then went to bed and slept for many hours. When he awoke, the sun was down, and he had departed in great anxiety lest he should lose a glimpse of the lovely vision. But whether it was by machinations of the swamp fairy, or merely the interference, right? Merely that it is one thing to go and another to return by the same road, he lost his way. I shall not attempt to describe his misery when the moon rose, and he saw nothing but trees, trees, trees. She was high in the heavens, the moon, right before he reached the glade. Then indeed his troubles vanished, for there was the princess coming dancing towards him, in a dress that shone like gold, and with shoes that glimmered through the grass like fireflies. She was, of course, still more beautiful than before. Like an embodied sunbeam, she passed him and danced away into the distance. Before she returned in her circle, clouds had begun to gather about the moon. The wind rose, the trees moaned, and their lighter branches leaned all one way before it. The prince feared that the princess would go in, and he should not see her no more that night. But she came dancing more jubilant than ever. Her golden dress and her sunny hair streaming out upon the blast, waving her arms towards the moon, and in the exuberance of her delight, ordering the clouds away from off her face. The prince could hardly believe she was not a creature of the elements after all. By the time she had completed another circle, the clouds had gathered deep, and there were growlings of distant thunder. Just as she passed the tree where he stood, a flash of lightning blinded him for a moment, and when he saw again, to his horror, the princess lay on the ground. He darted to her, thinking she had been struck, but when she heard him coming, she was on her feet in a moment. "What do you want?" she asked. "I beg your pardon. I thought the lightning," said the prince, hesitating. "There is nothing the matter," said the princess, waving him off rather haughtily. The poor prince turned and walked toward the wood. "Come back," said Daylight. "I like you. You do what you are told. Are you good?" The poor prince turned and walked toward... Are you good? "Not so good as I should like to be," said the prince. "Then go and grow better," said the princess. Again, the disappointed prince turned and went. He obeyed and... She said, "Come back," said the princess. He obeyed and stood before her. Wow. "Leave. So you better put that turkey back in the oven." as this woman Christy says. Right? She got a vision about, nope, turkey's not done. You're going to get poisoned. It's a job for Jesus, right? Anyway, she said, "Come back." He obeyed and stood before her waiting. "Can you tell me what the sun is like?" she asked. "No," he answered. "But what's the good of asking what you know?" "But I don't know," she rejoined. "Why, everybody knows. That's the very thing. I'm not everybody. I've never seen the sun." You got the sun in the morning and the moon at night. Wow. "Then you can't know what it's like till you do see it. I think you must be a prince," said the princess. "Do I look like one?" said the prince. "I can't quite say that." "Then why do you think so?" "Because you both do what you are told and speak the truth. Is the sun so very bright?" Bright as the lightning." "But it doesn't go out like that, does it?" "Oh, no, it shines like the moon, rises and sets like the moon, as much the same shape as the moon, only so bright that you can't look at it for a moment." "But I would look at it," said the princess. "But you couldn't," said the prince. "But I could," said the princess. "Why don't you then?" "Because I can't." "Why can't you?" "Because I can't wake, and I never shall wake until," and she paused, right? Here she hid her face in her hands, turned away, and walked in the slowest, stateliest manner towards the house. The prince ventured to follow her at a little distance, but she turned and made a repellent gesture, right? Which, like a true gentleman prince, he obeyed at once. He waited a long time, but as she did not come near him again, and as the night had now cleared, he set off at last for the old woman's cottage. It was long past midnight when he reached it, but to his surprise, the old woman was paring potatoes at the door. Fairies are fond of doing odd things. Indeed, however, they may dissemble. The night is always their day. And so it is with all who have fairy blood in them. "Why, what are you doing there this time of the night, mother?" said the prince, for that was the kind way in which any young man in his country would address a woman who was much older than himself. "Getting your supper ready, my son," she answered. "Oh, I don't want any supper," said the prince. "Ah, you've seen daylight," said she. "I've seen a princess who never saw it," said the prince, right? Never saw daylight. "Do you like her?" asked the fairy. "Oh, don't I?" said the prince. "More than you would ever believe." "More than you would believe, mother. A fairy can believe anything that ever was or ever could be," said the old woman. "Then are you a fairy?" asked the prince. "Yes," she said. "Then what do you do for things not to believe?" asked the prince. "There's plenty of them, everything that never was nor ever could be." "What do you do for things not to believe?" asked the prince. There's plenty of them, everything that never was nor ever could be." "Plenty, I grant you," said the prince. "But do you believe that there could be a princess who never saw daylight? Do you believe that now?" This the prince said, not that he doubted the princess, but that he wanted the fairy to tell him more. She was too old a fairy, however, to be caught so easily. "Of all people, fairies must not tell secrets. Besides, she's a princess." "Well, I'll tell you a secret. I'm a prince." "I know that." "How do you know it?" "By the curl of the third eyelash on your left eyelid." God recognizes our princess self, right? All women. George MacDonald says that at the beginning of The Princess and the Goblin. Don't you know that all young ladies and young boys are princes and princesses? He just says princesses in that one, but it's implied. Which corner do you count from?" "That's a secret." "Another secret. Well, at least, if I am a prince, there can be no harm in telling me about a princess. It's just princes I can't tell." "There ain't any more of them, are there?" said the prince. "What? You don't think you're the only prince in the world, do you?" "Oh dear, no, not at all. But I know there's one too many just at present, except the princess." Yes, that's it," said the fairy. "What's it?" asked the prince. But he could get nothing more out of the fairy, and he had to go to bed unanswered, which was something of a trial. Now, wicked fairies will not be bound by the laws which the good fairies obey, and this always seems to give the bad the advantage over the good, for they use means to gain their ends, which others will not. They try to trick you, and they tell you parts of the story you're not meant to know yet, and they try to confuse you and get you off path. But greater is he, Christ said this, right? Greater is he that it is in you and he that is in the world. I mean, it's implying Christ in us, the Holy Spirit, God in us. Anyway, But it is all of no consequence, for what they do never succeeds. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, right? Nay, in the end, it brings about the very thing they are trying to prevent. So you see that somehow, for all their cleverness, wicked fairies are dreadfully stupid. For although from the beginning of the world they have really helped instead of thwarted the good fairies, not one of them is a bit the wiser for it. She will try the bad thing just as they all did before her, and succeeds no better, of course. I'll wrap this up. Oh, let me see how many. Okay, there's 3 pages. I hope it's okay. I'll continue on, but I'm going to have to run back to get to my next appointment on time now. I have to run for a while because I wasn't planning on going over. I'll keep talking. She will try bad things just as they all did before her, and succeeds no better, of course. The prince had so far stolen a march upon the swamp fairy that she did not know he was in the neighborhood until after she had seen the princess those 3 times. He had seen the princess those 3 times, so he'd already seen the princess before the swamp fairy knew that it was a prince, or that he had been there. Anyway, when she knew it, she consoled herself by thinking that the princess must be far too proud and too modest for any young man to venture even to speak to her before he had seen her 6 times at least. But there was even less danger than the wicked fairy thought, for however much the princess might desire to be set free, she was dreadfully afraid of the wrong prince. Don't you know? Now, however, the fairy was going to do all she could. The bad fairy, right, was going to do all she could. So she so contrived to it by her deceitful spells that the next night the prince could not, by any endeavor, find his way to the glade. It would take me too long to tell of her tricks. They would be amusing to us who know that they could not do any harm, but they were something other than amusing for the poor prince. He wandered about the forest till daylight, then fell fast asleep. The same thing occurred for 7 following days, during which neither could he find the good fairy's cottage. After the 3rd quarter of the moon, however, the bad fairy thought she might be at ease about the affair for a fortnight, 2 weeks, right, at least, for there was no chance of the prince wishing to kiss the princess during that period. So the 1st day of the 4th quarter he did find the cottage, and the next day he found the glade. For nearly another week he haunted it, but the princess never came. I have little doubt she was on the farther edge of it some part of every night, but at this period she always wore black, and there being little or no light, the prince never saw her. Nor would he have known her if he had seen her. How could he have taken the worn, decrepit creature she was now for the glorious Princess Daylight? At last, one night, there was no moon at all, and he ventured near the house. There he heard voices talking, although it was past midnight, for her women were in considerable uneasiness, because the one whose turn it was to watch her had fallen asleep and had not seen which way she went, and this was a night when she would probably wander very far, describing a circle which did not touch the open glade at all, but stretched away from the back of the house, deep into the side of the forest, a part of which the prince knew nothing. When he understood from what they said that she had disappeared, and that she might have gone somewhere in the said direction, he plunged at once into the wood to see if he could find her. For hours he roamed, with nothing to guide him but the vague notion of a circle, which one side bordered on the house, for so much had he picked up from the talk he had overheard. It was getting towards the dawn, but as yet there was no streak of light in the sky, when he came to a great birch tree and sat down, very weary at the foot of it. While he sat, very miserable, you may be sure, full of fear for the princess, right? And wondering how her attendants could take it so quietly, he bethought himself that it would not be a bad plan to light a fire, which, if she were anywhere near, would attract her. This he managed with a tinder box, which the good fairy had given him. It was just beginning to blaze up when he heard a moan which seemed to come from the other side of the tree. He sprung to his feet, but his heart throbbed so that he had to lean for a moment against the tree before he could move. When he got round, there lay a human form, a little dark heap on the earth. There was light enough from his fire to show that it was not the princess. He lifted it in his arms, hardly heavier than a child. He carried it to the flame. The countenance was that of an old woman, but it had a fearfully strange look. A black hood concealed her hair, and her eyes were closed, and he laid her down as comfortably as he could, chafed her hands, put a little cordial from a bottle, also the gift of the fairy, into her mouth, took off his coat and wrapped it about her in short, did the best he could. In a little while she opened her eyes and looked at him so pitifully. The tears rose and flowed down her gray, wrinkled cheeks, but she never said a word. She closed her eyes again, but the tears kept on flowing. Her whole appearance was so utterly pitiful that the prince was very near crying too. He begged her to tell him what was the matter, promising to do all he could to help her. But still she did not speak. He thought she was dying and took her in his arms, again to carry her to the princess's house, where he thought the good-natured cook might be able to do something for her. When he lifted her, the tears flowed yet faster, and she gave such a sad moan that it went to his very heart. "Mother, mother," he said, "poor mother," and he kissed her on the withered lips. She started, and what eyes they were that opened upon him, but he did not see them, for it was still very dark, and he had enough to do to make his way through the trees towards the house. Just as he approached the door, feeling more tired than he could have imagined possible, she was such a little thin old thing. She began to move and became so restless that, unable to carry her a moment longer, he thought to lay her on the grass, but she stood upright on her feet. Her hood had dropped, and her hair fell about her. The first gleam of the morning was caught on her face. The face was bright as the never-aging dawn, and her eyes were lovely as the sky of darkest blue. The prince recoiled in overmastering wonder. It was Daylight herself, whom he had brought from the forest. He fell at her feet, nor dared look up until she laid her hand upon his head. He rose then. It's worth running the whole back. "You kissed me when I was an old woman. There! I kissed you when I am a young princess," murmured Daylight. "Is that the sun coming?" The next chapter is called Ruby, and the children were delighted with the story. All right, I wish you so much love. I gotta run. I have 11 minutes to make up for her. Much love.